What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items and the esportsdepartment.com. Um, in this video, we're going to go over the mid lane and the bot lane in the same way that we did top and jungle. Well, not the same way. It's going to be a condensed version. I couldn't make individual videos the past couple of days because I've been out doing stuff, and that's all you need to know. And we'll also go over the first two matches, I guess, because I think that might be one DraftKings slate. So let's start with the individual match, or let's start with the mid lane stuff. So in the jungle video, I think I was pretty clear that I think there is a big difference between Canyon and everybody else in terms of versatility of playstyle and things like that. In the mid lane, it's a little bit different, but not that much different. I think that when we're looking at the mid lane specifically, there are three mid laners who are difference makers in a very real way, and then there's a second tier and a third tier. So I have an S tier, A tier, B tier. So in the S tier, I think that the three best mid laners at Worlds are Showmaker, Faker, and Chovy. I think that out of the players who are left remaining, those are the three players who, from a drafting perspective and a talent perspective, give you the most problems. A player like Showmaker on red side can counterpick any champion that you throw at him. It just depends on whether or not his team is deciding to play through him specifically, like as a carry player instead of as just a good League of Legends player. So the difference there is between playing something like LeBlanc, Ryze, or Kassadin, or playing something like Twisted Fate or like Galio or something with a lot less damage. So the reason why that's significant is because it puts a lot of additional... It gives Damwon the option of putting additional draft pressure on the opposing teams by hiding mid lane picks. It forces the other team to make a more... like a safer pick, and then Showmaker can just abuse it. Faker is similar in that way, but he is not as good as Showmaker at this point in terms of like consistency and being asked to carry. But he does have the insanely high upside when he's given the opportunity to counter the other team in the draft, which is something that Faker has done every Worlds. Like if you lazily pick a do nothing control, well, not do nothing, but if you pick a do nothing control mage into him, he's very likely to pick an assassin into you and just try to punish you in the laning phase and win that way. This is not always this doesn't always result in like big victories for T1 because their drafting and their like low priority on getting engaged in draft sometimes just makes these games way too difficult, and it makes them all look a little bit worse than they really are. I think that T1 has looked good so far at Worlds. I don't think that we've seen the best of T1 at Worlds, and that there's another level that they can get to, and that's part of the reason why I'm not super afraid of Hanwha Life. But with that being said, Chovy is the third and final mid laner that I think is a true difference maker. And the thing with Chovy is that Hanwha Life in general has had a tough time transitioning the early game leads that Chovy has gotten in lane into proactive plays around the map, snowball their lead, and make an easy game state for themselves. That might not be a huge issue against a team like T1 because I think that there's a possibility that both teams kind of play it slower and allow the game to be decided by a large team fight 25 to 30 minutes in the game. And when I say stuff like that, obviously those kinds of team fights always happen and they may seem decisive, but what I mean is like they're both willing to have the game be a low kill score game that's within 1 to 2,000 gold, and that one team fight will most likely move a couple thousand gold one way or another, and then also turn into like a Baron. And that's really when the the quote unquote coin flip is going to happen. Um, so that's that. Those I just think that those three players have advantages over the other mid laners. A lot of the champion pools look the same, but the level of play on those champions is not the same. If you give Showmaker or Faker Zoe, uh, it's much better than giving it to Humanoid or Perks, Cryin, or even BDD and Scout. Uh, I just think that there are different levels to their impact that they have on the map, and this doesn't mean that Scout can't come out and have an insane series and look like the better mid laner in that match. But if you're just trying to figure out who creates a winning difference more often, it's going to be Showmaker, Faker, Chovy. So we have those three, and then in the next tier, like I said, I think that Scout and BDD have played better than the rest of the mid laners at Worlds, just from a results perspective and like an impact perspective. But also, I guess the real difference is that I don't see them being as hyper aggressive as players like Faker, Showmaker, and Chovy. They have the ability to take over a game, but it's not the same. It doesn't seem like the same kind of insane performance, and part of that has to do with how their teams are constructed. Scout and BDD are not the primary carries on their team. They're not asked to function in that way. They both have extremely good AD carries on their team. They're secondary carries, whereas Showmaker's number one, Faker's number one, Chovy's number one. Gumayusi has the upside of being the number one carry on their team, and T1 may draft into that scenario. But at the end of the day, Faker is really the heartbeat of T1. Chovy has depth. Yes, depth has looked good on a couple of different champions in different matchups, like the Ezreal game. There was at least one Ezreal game where he looked pretty powerful, or like mechanically highly mechanically skilled again. But then like Showmaker has Ghost, and even though Ghost has played like a Draven game and an Aphelios game, I think at Worlds, it's just not the same. They're not the same types of AD carries as Ruler or Viper. And then last we have Perks, Cryin, and Humanoid. I know that at this point it's probably like a broken record where I say something negative about Humanoid, or like make fun of people who rate Humanoid highly in almost every video. But I just think it's true. Like I really don't see how you can look at a player like Humanoid, look at the champions that he's playing, the impact that he has in the game, and like how he's asked to function within the team. I don't know how you can look at that and then say that he's like an extremely gifted player. Like, it's just not. I just don't see it. I don't see the same thing that you see, and I'm not. I just really don't believe that it's there. And then I think Cryin is a very similar player. They have a lot of the same champions that they play. They both kind of rely on TF, and the reason why that happens is because TF does fundamentally change how the game has to be played, because it limits side lane opportunities, because you can continuously get caught out, which is, something you definitely need to avoid when you're the winning team. And then with Perks, Perks has looked better, I think, than people expected him to at Worlds, especially in the last day where there were like the tiebreakers and everything. Perks looked legit. Like, he's a very good player. He's one of the best Western players of all time. That's why you have to, in my opinion, you should place a very high value on long-term talent, because all it takes is one good game and they can get hot. Like, it's like in basketball when you have a really good three-point shooter. He's been in a slump. He makes his first three, and then he just makes the next 10. Like, that's just how League of Legends can work as well. So if that helps some people understand, that's kind of the same thing. the game just slows down in weird ways sometimes. And I know that some people may not agree with that, but I think that Perkz, I just think that Perkz is better than Humanoid straight up. From a talent perspective, I think when we look back at this time period 10 years from now, we're going to say, oh yeah, Perkz was one of the best Western players of all time, and we'll be like, oh yeah, Humanoid used to be a professional League of Legends player. I don't think that we're going to say very high things about Humanoid. I don't think that it's possible to look at how Mad Lions functions and give him the credit for it. It's just not reality. So let's go to the bot lane. So in the bot lane, this is much more difficult to kind of discuss, in my opinion, because the only two AD carries that I have a ton of respect for, in terms of like skill, ability, and their team playing around them, are Viper and Ruler. I think that Viper and Mako, and Ruler and Life are the two best duo combinations, specifically for hard carrying the game. Any bot lane in professional League of Legends can play a utility AD carry or Misfortune or Jhin, or one of these types of champions and do well enough. You can provide something to the team. You can be a Misfortune who uses one ultimate, gets a couple of assists, and your kill score, your scoreline will look good, and nobody's going to question you. But at the end of the day, the reason why you were able to contribute in any way is because the support, jungle, top laner, mid laner were, creating engages, keeping people in one spot, creating choke points. Like, that's what their job is, and your job is to do some damage. Doing the damage part is not difficult unless you're horrible at the game. And obviously, all of these players are professional players. They're not horrible at the game, and they do their jobs very well. But you can't ascribe like some kind of ridiculous upside to them just because they're on a utility AD carry playing Jhin, playing Misfortune. Like, it's just not impressive, in my opinion. Like, if you're not the one carrying the game, making game-making plays, it's really difficult for me to think that you're the reason why the team is winning. A lot of the time, the support is the more important player because of those engage opportunities that they can create, because of the roaming and everything like that. Like, it's nice to have players who have mechanical upside in the AD carry position, because when you get into those drafts that you need a late game carry, you can depend on a player like Ruler and Viper. They will mechanically outplay the opponent even from a deficit sometimes, and that's unique and should be celebrated, in my opinion. Ghost and Beryl. So Ghost has played a couple of carry games, but I think that anyone watching, well, most people, there are people out there watching League of Legends who I'm sure can appreciate that Draven and Aphelios, while they can both carry very hard, they're very different types of carry champions. So like Jinx and Aphelios, those two champions are more similar to me because you're very immobile. You don't have a ton of utility, a ton of like instant utility. Like, yes, you have your traps and your W as Jinx, but that's not really the same as Draven's E. Like, I just feel like it's better and more impactful, especially in the early game. And then with Aphelios, you can root people, but it's really not as reliable. Like, Draven can punish lane extremely hard, can snowball out of control, and then just like one-shot people. Like, we haven't seen like an absolutely wild Draven performance yet at Worlds, but I think that we probably will during the knockout round, because there's going to be some lazy drafting, and Draven is a very good champion to punish lazy drafts. But like, if you told me that Sven was playing Aphelios and Jinx, do you think that C9 is going to win? No. If you told me that Gala was playing Aphelios or Jinx, do you think that they'd be winning? Now, that one's a little bit more difficult. Personally, I don't think so. I think that up against EDG, that would be kind of a silly way to approach the game, just because, Viper is definitely better at that playstyle. But I'm not a huge fan of Gala. I think that when he's on Kai'Sa, yes, he looks good because it's a flashy champion, and then when he's playing a utility AD carry, he can do his job and let Xiaohu carry. but if it was me, I really wouldn't want to put the game into Gala's hands. Deft, like, yes, the play style does fit Deft, but I'm just not 100% convinced that Deft is the AD carry that he used to be. Still serviceable, but I think against T1 you'll probably have to be better than serviceable. And then Carzzy and Kaiser, like, I don't think that playing Aphelios and Jinx is really the way to beat Damwon. I think that Mad Lions does have chances to beat Damwon because if they play their team fighting style, Damwon could draft themselves into a corner a few games, and maybe that allows Mad Lions to stick around in games long enough to win a team fight and then win the game. Like, it's very possible that that happens at least once or twice in this series. But that's basically it. So, like I said, I've been saying this before Worlds even started. I think that Showmaker, I said that if it was going to be a mid lane meta, I thought that FPX and Damwon were going to be the two best teams because you had two very good mid laners who were going to be able to carry the rest of their team. DoinB wasn't able to do that, obviously. And a part of that came down to like really bad drafting, the limitations of LWX, the limitations of Tian. So like they'll probably look much different next year, which is somewhat sad. It's like the end of an era, but you know that happens. And then I said that if it was going to be an AD carry meta or a hyper carry meta, which it really hasn't been because of the types of teams we've seen play so far, but I really think as the knockout round goes on, we'll see a refined meta where the utility AD carries get punished a little bit more hard by Aphelios and Jinx because these teams are just not going to have enough damage to deal with them late game. You'd have to build up decent advantages in the early game to like stay ahead of the curve against champions like that. But I'm excited. I love watching League of Legends for that reason because things will change, and that will it'll show us what this patch. It'll show us how this patch really wants to be played by top teams at a high level. Like, you can look at games that all professional teams play and get an idea about the quote-unquote meta, but popularity really doesn't determine what the meta is, in my opinion. It really should come down to what is actually the strongest, not what do teams play, because teams are allowed to play suboptimal stuff. But that's enough of that. So let's talk about the specific matchups. So tomorrow morning, we have T1 against Hanwha Life. So obviously, the main narrative, the main matchup that a lot of people are going to think about in regards to being like a big talent discrepancy is in the top lane. Kana has been very good for multiple years, and Morgan has looked like a liability at times during the playing stage and during the main event. I have been willing to give Morgan the benefit of the doubt, partially because of the drafts, but at the same time, Morgan's a part of the reason why the drafts have seemed to be so difficult for Hanwha Life. So I can see it both ways, but I think that even in this scenario, there's probably too much weight on Kana being that much better than Morgan. When like we saw during the finals, Kana basically played Kennen every single game, which is fine. That's not a problem, but it's not going to be able to. It's not going to punish Morgan in the same way. In the jungle, we have Oner and Willer. I think that they're a little bit difficult to get a handle on because we don't have as much. We haven't seen them for as long as we've seen some of these other players. So it's mostly going to come down to what kind of matchups do we get. How do T1 and Hanwha Life approach the drafts? Because while I think that Oner has had probably the best carry performance out of Oner and Willer, I'm not sure that they have much different ceilings yet. We've seen really good performances out of Willer. We've seen really good performances out of Oner. In the mid lane, Faker against Chovy. They're both extremely good. it and again, I know it might sound like a cop out, but we really don't know how they're going to approach the draft. If we get a T1 that is, you know, either team really. If we get one team who's just willing to lock in TF every game, it's going to be a lot different. Like that's not a matchup where talent is really going to come into play as much. That's more about team like cooperation and communication and stuff like that. It really doesn't come down to individual skill if TF is like a very important champion in these drafts. So that's just something to keep in mind. If it gets into a spot where counter picks become relevant, I think that we'll see a very explosive matchup and a back and forth matchup. And in that scenario, I would want to bet Hanwha Life plus 1.5 maps. Actually, would I? Yeah, I think I would. Yeah. Yeah. And then in the bot lane, Gumayusi and Keria against Deft and Vista. I think that this could be a spot where we really see Keria shine, because if Hanwha Life is playing immobile carries, then Keria is going to have a chance to completely dominate the game. We saw Vista play a bunch of different champions, stylistically as well. Like he even pull off a Pyke game. Keria is probably better at every single support than Vista. So you kind of just have to give the advantage to T1 in that spot. So because of that, you realistically have an advantage in the top lane. Maybe not as big as what some people would suggest, but an advantage nonetheless. You have Owner and Willer, which I'm willing to say is like a push. You have Showmaker, or you have Faker and Chovy, which could be a push unless we get big draft problems or like focus on TF. And then we have an advantage for T1 in the bot lane, probably mostly because of Keria. But also, we could see something out of Gumayusi where it's just like this really high ceiling that they're going to be the more aggressive player than Deft, so it will probably look better. Like if T1 is winning, you'll be more impressed by Gumayusi than if Hanwha Life is winning. Like if Hanwha Life is winning and it's like a bunch of Aphelios games and Deft is like playing at a very high mechanical level, then maybe I'm wrong about that, but that doesn't seem like the most likely scenario to me. So at the end of the day, I don't love T1 minus 400, but if your goal is to pick the right side, not get value for your money, then T1 is the side that you should probably support. If you said to yourself, "Hey, Pykel, I'm not betting $20 on T1 at minus 400," I hear you. It's not the kind of thing that gets you excited. But that's about it. So let's move on. In the next matchup, we have RNG against EDG. EDG is a slight favorite, and I think I mentioned this in one of my other videos. If they posted this line, if you knew that this was going to be the knockout round matchup, and you posted the line before the tournament started, RNG would be the favorite. I think that is just true. I think that in the top lane, Xiaohu is a better player than Flandre. Xiaohu will sometimes play Gragas, which is just bad. I think that it's a bad choice into a lot of these matchups, and I think that it's a bad choice just from a theory perspective, because Xiaohu is theoretically your best player. Why are you putting him onto a champion like Gragas, who doesn't do sustained damage and cannot completely hard carry your entire team? Because that's really where he shines. Is just like, give him resources, play around him, let him carry. That's how you should be playing League of Legends if you're RNG, in my opinion, especially if you have Cryan playing supportive mid laners. In the jungle, we have Wei and Jai Jai. They're another two players who I think they've been given probably too much credit for the success of their teams. I don't think that they are gigantic difference makers in the jungle. Sometimes they're going to have good kill scores. Sometimes they're going to have really good plays, but you can't depend on them. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this um, if we saw this matchup and came away from it thinking that it was a boring matchup in the jungle. I just don't think. I'm just not. I don't have much optimism around that matchup specifically. In the mid lane, we have Cryan and Scout. I think that stylistically, Scout has a huge advantage over Cryan. I think that Cryan is a very limited player. The over reliance on Twisted Fate should tell you everything you need to know about Cryan. Is it possible that they have a couple of other champions that will make them look good? Yes, but when your team has to constantly pick Twisted Fate to like hide you, I mean, there's nothing else to really say. Like, they're a completely different team when he's not on Twisted Fate. And then in the bot lane, we have Viper and Mako against Gala and Ming. I think that I just prefer Viper and Mako in general, but especially in this matchup, I think that Scout has the big advantage in the mid lane. I think that Viper and Mako have a big advantage stylistically in the bot lane. And then the jungle, I'm not convinced it's going to be a huge difference either way. And then in the top lane, if you just draft around Xiaohu and play away from Xiaohu and like punish Xiaohu, EDG should be able to win. So I feel weird because I think I may have just reversed myself while I was talking about that. But I do think that RNG would have been listed as the favorite if this line was posted before the tournament started. And that would have put EDG at plus money. And if EDG was at plus money, I would like them. I don't like betting them at minus 138. I think that you've lost all your value there. If it was up to me, I would not make this bet. I think that EDG is the right side. I'll be actively rooting for EDG in this matchup. But I don't love the money line here. I'm gonna bet it. I'm gonna bet on EDG because I do think that it will be the better side. So that's basically it. I know it's not as thorough as some of my other videos have been, but I've got a bunch of stuff I still have to do tonight before I pass out. So yeah, I'm excited. Can't wait to watch these matches tomorrow. Should be a lot of fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.